Roughly a decade ago, Nintendo sought out to modernize many of their classic Zelda games by giving them remakes and remasters for current-gen systems. This started with 2011's Ocarina of Time 3D, and eventually moved on to 2013's Wind Waker HD, 2015's Majora's Mask 3D, and finally 2016's Twilight Princess HD. These remakes offered many changes to the original, such as upgraded visuals and added quality of life improvements. But in some cases, these changes proved to be disservices to the originals, and sometimes stripped away key elements that made these games great in their past state. With the potential release of remakes such as Skyward Sword HD or even A Link Between Worlds HD on the horizon, I feel that it's best to look back at these changes to figure out exactly what makes a good Zelda remake. First off, let's start with the graphics. Obviously, a remake is more than just slapping a fresh coat of paint on a game, but let's be real, this is the first thing that we all notice when playing one. And for the most part, these games do make noticeable changes to the original. Let's look at Wind Waker for an example, which looks great in its own light, but is significantly improved in the HD version, with grand overhauls in resolution, textures, and even the lighting. Same thing with Twilight Princess, although not as significant as Wind Waker's, is still a grand improvement on the original version. Both of these remakes have something major in common though. They both significantly improve the graphics without trampling on the original art style or feel of the game, a problem that is apparent within the other two remakes, Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3D. You see, given the original game's more polygonal character and world design, I get that Nintendo had to completely redo the art style in order to modernize these older games, but I think that they strayed way farther away than they should have. This bubbly, cartoonish style may look cleaner than the original, but it lacks that classic grittiness and texture that the original brought to the game. Places like the Shadow Temple and the bottom of the well that were once genuinely terrifying are robbed of this by the bright and happy feel present in the remakes. What was nice about the originals is that its neutral look and style was able to properly convey any sort of emotion, while the new one just adds an unnecessary vibrant and happy spin on everything. Just look at the moon from Majora's Mask. By far one of the most terrorizing and iconic faces in the whole franchise, has now been reduced to this overly angry, quite ridiculous looking face that is just more goofy than anything. I just wish that Nintendo would have been more considerate to the original style when remaking these two games, but I'm at least glad that the HD remakes got the proper treatment here, a common theme that you might notice throughout this video. I have to admit something here. I could not stand the sailing in the original Wind Waker. It was easily one of the slowest and most tedious things in any Zelda game to date. Because in order to travel by sea, you would first have to open up your inventory, pull out your Wind Waker and your sail, play the Wind's Requiem to set the wind direction, then have an encore performance remind you that you just played the Wind's Requiem, attach a sail to the boat, and only then you are ready to sail at a steady 5 miles per hour until you reach your destination. And what's worse is that the further and further you progress in the game, sailing only becomes more and more of a prevalent feature throughout, all the way up until the Forbidden Triforce quest, which requires the player to sail between a grand total of 16 locations across the Great Sea in one long, drawn-out mission. This late game sailing section was so tedious to the point that a lot of people just up and quit playing the game due to how boring this overdrawn section was. Now pop in the HD remaster of this game and holy crap, this fixes everything. First off, the sail item is now just always tied to your boat, and your Wind Waker is permanently bound to the up D-pad, so there is no need to swap these items in and out like in the original. And if you ever need to change the wind direction via Wind Waker, there are no more repetitive encore performances that'll play after your first time, as it just cuts straight to the chase. These small changes make the initial sailing segments in this game already a lot smoother, but what's even nicer is the addition of the new Swift Sail item that can be obtained quite early on, which not only doubles ship travel speed, but also changes the direction of the wind automatically for you. These drastic changes to the sailing system not only fix the problems with the original, but also make sailing in this version of the game one of my favorite things in any Zelda game to date. This is a perfect example of what a good remake should do, fixing all those dumb, tedious things that were clearly overlooked when making the original game. Just like in Ocarina of Time's Water Temple, which in the original version required the player to pause the game and fumble through the menus each and every time they wanted to equip or unequip the iron boots. In the 3D remake, however, these boots can be equipped or unequipped just like a normal item, and their effects can be activated and deactivated with a single button press. This small, efficient change that once made traversing this dungeon one of the most dreaded things in Zelda history allowed me to efficiently navigate it to actually appreciate it for what it was. However, in shadow of a lot of the great changes these remakes have to offer, there are several changes that felt so unnecessary to the point that they actually did a disservice to the original game. Let's take a look at Majora's Mask dungeon bosses for an example, which were great in their original game and didn't need to be meddled with, but they were meddled with anyways. Streamlined takedown methods, buggy secondary phases, and large eyeball weak points are among some of the main changes that these battles underwent in the remake. And for what reason? I can say the same thing about the Zora swimming in this game as well. They took easily one of the best, most fast-paced things in the original and turned it into an absolute snooze fest by cutting Zorling's speed in half. But why? It seems that the developers were just so out of tune with what made the game great in its original state, and instead decided to streamline it to feel more like the previous Zelda games that came before it. And the funny thing is, they spent so much time fixing all the things that didn't even need to be meddled with, to the point that they actually forgot to fix the things that needed to be worked on. Remember Stone Tower Temple and how you had to tediously play the Elegy of Emptiness like 80 billion times to work your way up this place? Well, surprise surprise, the remake did absolutely nothing to improve or speed this section up. They could have at least did what Wind Waker HD did, and cut out all the encore performances after playing these songs. Or maybe make the 3 transformation masks that are constantly needed for this section remappable to the D-pad for a more brisk and fluid experience. But I guess not. And the funny thing is, Wind Waker HD came out a whole 2 years before Majora's Mask did, and yet did the exact opposite of what this game did right. It just really seems that their priorities were not in order when remaking this. Bottom line, when remaking a game, the developer should first embrace and enhance the good qualities about that said game, then focus on the wrongdoings, not the other way around. I would have to admit that by far the most handholdy 3D Zelda game out there to date would have to be Skyward Sword. I mean, come on, a creepy fairy spirit is constantly telling you what to do. Sheikah stones are available to literally guide you through specifics of the game, and often, some of the most innovative puzzles are just straight up spoiled by these stone tablets that literally read out the solution of the puzzle before you even have a chance to solve it yourself. It's almost as if Nintendo just straight up lost faith in their fanbase's ability to think for themselves. And unfortunately, this way of game design crept its way into both Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask 3D. In these games, you can now find special Sheikah stones that literally give the player straight up hints and walkthroughs on what to do next if they are stuck. Sure, these older games were definitely some of the toughest 3D Zelda games out there, but I always thought that solving and overcoming these challenges was what made Zelda games fun to begin with. To have a convenient method to just straight up cheat these games just doesn't feel right at all, even if it caters to a more handholdy crowd. And these aren't the only changes that took away from the grand experience either. Remember Fi's iconic fourth wall breaks in Skyward Sword, who would constantly remind the player that their Wiimote batteries were low? Well, now in Ocarina, a persistent Navi will keep bothering the player to take a break from the game if they've been playing for over an hour. Why were these changes necessary? They probably could have fixed this by just making a normal and an assist mode, kinda like what they did with Mario Odyssey. This way, normal fans can actually enjoy the game the way it was meant to be played, and a lot of the newcomers and the younger audience can still have the assistance they need. So it'll be a win-win for everyone then. I'm just going to start the section off by saying this. The aiming in the original Zelda games was just terrible, at least by modern standards. Try going back to the original Ocarina of Time and play any of the archery minigames with an N64 controller, and you will definitely see what I am talking about. It was clunky, imprecise, but thankfully was drastically improved with the 3DS remake thanks to the all-new gyro aim. Bow controls are just so effortless and fluid, and it just works so well to the point that all other Zelda remakes eventually got this feature when they released as well. This is a great example of using modern hardware to further accelerate the experience of an older game, and Nintendo I feel did this perfectly time and time again across all Zelda remakes. For example, Wind Waker further modernized the experiences of these classic Zelda games by introducing free rotating camera control with the right stick, which would eventually get implemented in both Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess HD that followed. Also, all of these remakes make great use of the second screen consoles by allowing the player to observe and manage their inventory in real time while playing, which reduces downtime and allows for a more fast-paced, fluid experience. I know I've laid into Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time 3D a lot in this video, but for this segment, I do have to give equal praise to all 4 of these games, because after all, Nintendo has usually been doing a great job with introducing many of their consoles' gimmicks into the games itself. So props to you. Before I get to this video's conclusion, I would just like to go over a few loose notes I had when reanalyzing these remakes that didn't quite make it into the past discussions from earlier. For one, I do really appreciate the clever little Easter eggs that were thrown into these remasters, like the secret Skyward Sword teases in Ocarina of Time, and the Breath of the Wild one found in Twilight Princess. Also, I did really appreciate the Miiverse tie-ins found within both Wind Waker and Twilight Princess, with the Tingle Bottle and stamps respectively. They both added a unique social aspect to these games that unfortunately has been deemed useless with the death of the Miiverse program itself. Majora's Mask also tried adding a few new features as well, such as putting in some brand new fishing holes, but considering that they prioritize adding things like this instead of actually fixing the game's flaws, I'm still kinda disappointed with the way things turned out for this game. The most important factor when remaking a game is to modernize the gameplay as much as possible without trampling on what made it great in its original state. After all, despite some of their dated mechanics, these 4 original games are still quite fantastic, and that's why they all got remasters to begin with. When it comes down to it though, I still think that Wind Waker HD is the perfect example of a Zelda remake, as it does the best job on modernizing the past gameplay, upgrading the experience to its fullest, and it does it all without trampling on the great qualities of the original game. Although Twilight Princess was also improved in a similar manner, these changes were not nearly as significant or ambitious as Wind Waker's, but still great enough to be considered the superior version of this game. Ocarina and Majora's Mask, however, I would have to say differently. Although there are a few minor improvements within these 2 remakes, things like the out-of-touch art style and the hand-holding elements that were added to these games really took away from the overall experience, to the point that I would just rather play the N64 versions of these games instead. But if I would have to pick an absolute worst Zelda remake out of the 2, it would still easily be Majora's Mask 3D, as they added and changed so many core features to the game that were a complete disservice to the original. But with that said, despite the many successes and failures of the past Zelda remakes, there is a lot of things that Nintendo can learn from them to make the next one the best that it can be. Skyward Sword, for an example, could either tone down the handholding or restrict it to a separate assist mode. They can utilize the Joy-Con's amazing gyroscopes to make sword combat way more fluid and precise. And also, tone down some of the repetitive backtracking segments, will ya? Like seriously, there are just so many great ideas I've been thinking of for Skyward Sword HD that I may even make a separate video down the road showing them all off. Let me know down in the comments if a video like that would interest you. But for now, I'm glad that I finally got to share with you what makes a good Zelda remake. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to drop a like and subscribe, as it'll help me out immensely. Also, big shout out to my amazing patrons who help support the channel. I'll leave a link down in the description below if you would like to help me out here as well. Anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see ya in the next one.